So surprise, surprise, I'm your moderator. So I'm really excited to actually moderate this panel because it's something I really am passionate about. And travelling around Asia, we see it's so endemic. And so I think it's really topical that we've got a great panel for you. I'll ask them to come up, don't be shy. So we have Jayne Paramor, Sustainability Manager, Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. We have Andrea, Polson. She is the founder of, she is the Marketing Comms Manager for IQRenew and Licella. We have Darren Lomman, and you'll notice his T-shirt. His T-shirts are on sale on his website. He'll talk about that. So Darren is the founder of Greenbatch. And last but certainly not least is Barry Cozier. He's a Director of Sustainability for the Australian Food and Grocery Council. So without any further ado, let's pull this around so we can have a chat. So, welcome. This is a little chat that we're going to have between just us and about 50 of our closest friends. So just some numbers, which I thought were quite compelling. And I got my calculator out and I found out that we produce about 500 billion plastic bottles a year. So those are the plastic water bottles. And so end to end, they would circle the globe 7 times a day. So if you put them end to end, they circle the globe 7 times a day. So it speaks to the issue that we're seeing in terms of not only the convenience of plastic, but the prevalence of it in our ecosystem. So I'm going to throw it straight to Darren. So for you, tell us about your T-shirt and why is it relevant to what we're talking about with plastic?
I kind of stumbled into the plastic world by accident watching a TV advert selling reusable shopping bags. And in that advert, they said by 2050, it's estimated there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, what a lot of greenwashing from those enviros to try and make us buy those bags, and kind of got a bit curious and started doing some research and discovered the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and some of this stuff has come from science and research. I thought that was pretty terrible and wanted to do something about it.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you are doing with Greenbatch.
So Greenbatch started in Western Australia and we launched a crowdfunding campaign to basically launch WA's very first plastic reprocessing plant. When we started in this world, not a single bit of plastic had ever been reprocessed in WA. It had all been put on ships and sent to places like China and Malaysia and that sort of stuff, which is not too different to the rest of Australia. And rather than sitting back and waiting for government and industry to solve it, we said, as a community, let's get behind and let's solve it ourselves. So we launched a crowdfunding campaign and it became one of WA's biggest ever crowdfunding campaigns. And we launched off with a small little scale plant doing 300 kilos a week. And we're now on the verge of 5,000 kilos an hour in WA, which is enough to do all the WA's PET and HDPE. And we just put bids into setting up a plant in New South Wales and one in Queensland. So
amazing.
Yeah. All from a TV advert.
Amazing, fantastic. Barry, over to you. You're the Director of Sustainability of the Australian Food and Grocery Council. Do you think consumers really understand the magnitude of the problem?
It's a pretty big question too. I think the consumers get the size of ocean plastics and marine litter. There's been a lot of media on that, a lot of documentaries, so that's well informed. Unfortunately, that's just narrowed it down to straws and so on. Mm-hmm. If you ask the question, are they aware of the issues in recycling? Answer's probably no. And the other gap I think is really large is why is there so much plastic in the ocean? Where's it coming from?
Yeah.
Which sort of leads to the whole issue of waste infrastructure and bottled water and so on in Asia. Mm-hmm. So that's, I guess, another topic. So there's a lot to it. So answering the direct question, yeah, they're aware, but not the full detail.
Yeah, and I think there was one stat, I think it's 5 countries in Asia produce close to half of the world's plastic waste. That's China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines and Thailand. So around half of the global plastic waste is coming from those 5 countries. What's something that we can do about that? Can we really influence something here in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely we can. A lot of the material that is being made in that part of the world is actually destined for markets like ours. The fact that they have issues with mismanagement, they're some of the areas that we can help support them with in terms of, aid budgets and those sorts of things that can be put into infrastructure and helping them to, manage their waste more effectively. But if we start to stop demanding the plastic, then they won't have the need to produce it, and ultimately we end up with a dwindling source of materials.
Yeah. So Jayne, tell us a little bit about the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. What is your overarching objective, and what do you hope to, if you were sitting here in 5 years' time, and hopefully you're back at Global Table, Seeds&Chips in five years' time, what would you hope to achieve?
Okay, so APCO, the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, is actually responsible for administering the Australian Packaging Covenant, which is a piece of regulation that's been in place for about 20 years, the idea of which has two primary underpinning objectives, one of which is to improve the sustainability of packaging for all consumer goods in Australia, so anything that's either manufactured or imported into Australia. Is ascribed to a brand owner who is the responsible party for that, and we work with brand owners across the country to improve the packaging profile, the sustainability profile of their packaging. The other thing that we are charged with is trying to avoid the escape of packaging materials into the environment. So we have a remit around collection, sortation, recycling that allows us to talk in that space as well. As an organisation, we work across all levels of packaging, so it goes from everything from consumer goods that appear on the shelf that you as a shopper buy and take home and use in your household, to the materials that product is delivered to a store in, to the materials that are used to ship that product around the territory, around the country, around the world. So we cover all levels of packaging across the sphere.
Yeah.
So we have quite a broad remit in that respect.
And tell us, I know you're with APCO, but tell us a little bit about the Boomerang Alliance.
Okay, so prior to APCO, I come from an organisation called Boomerang Alliance, and the Boomerang Alliance is an alliance of about 50 different community grassroots organisations, local government authorities, academic institutions, various different community level organisations that have been agitating around the plastic waste space for about 15 years. Mm-hmm. Their focus was very much around stimulating desire for container deposit schemes across the country, and I think given everywhere apart from Victoria, if I correctly remember, has actually committed to putting a CDS in play. We're hoping that Victoria will come along the path fairly soon. We're hearing good noises at the moment. But Boomerang was basically established to bring a lot of those voices together that were concerned about things like waste washing up on beaches and pollution and litter that was entering the environment, and brought this group of organisations together to give a collective voice to the issue. And I think over the space of 15 years have been quite successful in raising that awareness.
Fantastic. And Andrea, over to you. Tell us a little bit about Licella. What are you doing, and what's the technology about? Because it seems amazing.
So Lifecycle, what we do is we've developed it's a chemical recycling platform. So it's called the CAT-HTR, which stands for Catalytic Hydrothermal Reactor.
That's the word for today, everyone.
I'll try to keep it simple, but essentially what we do is we target plastic that can't be physically recycled. So what we term end-of-life plastic. So plastic that currently ends up in landfill and quite often leaks into the environment, to the ocean. What we do is we take the plastic and we chemically transform it with water under high temperature and pressure, and we can create an oil. So what we're doing is we're essentially re-refining the plastic back to the oil it came from. So prior to being your plastic water bottle, it was oil, which was refined into create plastic. So what we're doing is re-refining it back to oil, which can then be used to make fuels and chemicals or the next generation of plastic bottles. So essentially what we're trying to do, or what we've developed, is the technology to allow plastic to become a circular resource. So rather than something that we use, throw away, plastic can be a resource which we use over and over again, and in turn we can actually reduce our reliance on fossil oil. Yeah. So that's what we've done. So we've developed the technology, and we're working with our partners IQRenew, who do the physical recycling of plastic. So together if we add physical recycling, so taking a plastic bottle, chipping it up, melting it down, making it into new plastic bottles, or the chemical recycling, taking the plastic, so your pots, tubs, meat trays, soft plastic, so plastic film, which is obviously a big challenge in terms of physical recycling here in Australia. We used to ship it all to China. Can't do that anymore, so what we're doing is trying to find a local solution. So by adding chemical recycling to the mix, we can recover essentially almost 100% of plastic.
Yeah, so China, I guess everyone knows, China changed their import regulations to limit the amount of contaminated waste that was coming in. Do you think it's fair that we should be blaming China, or is it really put a lens on the infrastructure or the lack of infrastructure here in Australia?
I actually think that it's a good thing. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what other panellists think. I think what it's done is it's given us the push that we need to really, our industry here, recycling, has been set up traditionally. It's changing, and there's a lot of good people doing a lot of great innovations in the space, but it's been set up to export. So we have limited local plastic recycling in particular, and others as well, glass. So what we're doing now is we're sort of scrambling to catch up in terms of trying to build more local solutions and increase the infrastructure to recycle things locally. And, in an ideal world, I think there are some people close to the Chinese recycling industry who saw it coming and have been starting to lay the foundation for increasing our local recycling. I know Danny Gallagher, who's the CEO of IQRenew, had been doing that and trying to, and then others, don't want to hear about it.
So I think they're relocating to Thailand, Malaysia,
Yeah, that's
Philippines.
right.
Now they've been found out. They're sending containers back.
So
Is this?
now, and it's not sustainable. So what's been happening is the tide of plastic has moved from China to other countries, so to Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, but now those markets are shutting down. So we're faced with a situation where we have to deal with our plastics here in Australia, which I think is a good thing, but in order to do that, we need support from government in terms of funding. We need policy which embraces technological innovations like chemical recycling. So I think that the technology is there and the innovations are there to help us along, but what we need to do is we need to catch up in terms of our local capability.
Yeah, okay. So Darren, I mean, plastics ain't plastics. Why is it such a hassle to sort plastics into the different types? For the people, the uneducated people, including myself in the room, why is that such an issue?
Yeah. There's obviously lots of different types of plastics. You've got the 1 to 7 numbers that you're probably familiar with, but even within like number 1, there's different grades and properties and IV values that can be used for different types of materials. And if we start mixing stuff in, then you effectively are downcycling. You never retain that full property of that material. So when a bottle starts its life, it starts off as a little test tube and then gets blown up like a balloon, and that's stretching it. You imagine like filling up a water balloon as a kid. You put too much water in it, it pops and it bursts. So water bottles, as they're getting thinner and thinner, you need to have really good quality plastic. You start mixing different types of plastics in there in a recycling process, and then you've got different materials and plastics that melt at different temperatures. When you're injecting it through nozzles, it creates blockages. And you think about a bottling plant, we're talking about, 500 billion bottles? Like, you imagine shutting that plant down for an hour because you've got a blockage in there. That's why beverage companies in the past haven't really been that excited by using recycled materials. It's easier to get cheap, new, virgin plastic and just use that.
Yep.
But there's been a recent kind of awakening from a public perspective of people wanting beverage companies to take responsibility and use recycling. Through the packaging covenants, there's the pledge for 100% of packaging to be recyclable.
But is it a
2025.
pledge? Is it just a pledge? Is that just like, oh, that's like nice, fuzzy stuff? Or is it really, is that something that's really tangible? Maybe, I know you're dying to have a chat about this.
I was actually just going to say something about the plastics ain't plastics. I think one of the big issues that we face at the moment, which is clouding the issue a little bit, is that we're moving down a path with things like biodegradable and compostable plastics. And I think Darren will attest to the fact that once you start getting these things into your good quality materials like your PETs and your HDPEs, the compromising quality of these alternative materials is actually very damaging to the materials that are viably recyclable over and over again. And that's causing a lot of problem in terms of users and consumers not actually being able to identify the difference between these materials, putting things in their yellow bin and hoping that they will get recycled. And in actual fact, it has a negative impact on the outcome at the end of it. In terms of the targets, yeah, they are aspirational targets. They have been set by the federal government as objectives that the government and the country would like to meet. The interesting thing that we're seeing, and particularly actually my boss has just come back from a trip to Europe in the last few weeks, the voluntary targets that we are working towards here in this country are actually causing them, particularly the big multinationals, to push the boat so far out. They're going to achieve them, and they're going to achieve them ahead of time. And we're actually seeing them being used as, promotional elements for big brands. They can talk about the fact that they're achieving these objectives, and they're becoming, I guess, flags of honour.
Is this like
for
the
them.
next stage ticker box CSR, or is it going to be really...
No, it's actually, we're seeing interesting results come out of it. We're seeing innovation. We're seeing them trying to do things that aren't necessarily going to compromise their business, but they want to be able to say that they've achieved this stuff and stand up against all the other big players in the market that are doing the same thing and have the positive outcomes, because ultimately their consumers are demanding it, and if they're not doing it, then they're going to fall by the wayside. So I think they actually recognise that. The difference between us and somewhere like Europe is that the voluntary targets mean that they're pushing that boat out, whereas in Europe they're just complying with law. So we're seeing them go a lot further here than they perhaps are in other territories where all they have to do is tick the box, meet the compliance level, and that's as much as they need to achieve.
Barry, I know you're dying. So
itching on this one.
packaging makes up half the waste. What's the responsibility of the...
Probably a couple of comments. So just on the manufacturers, like if the Coke announced a few months back that they're going to 7 in 10 bottles going to be 100% recycled content. The target's 30. So the aspirational target, they're well above that. Other companies have got heaps of initiatives going on. Yeah. So benchmark of 30, but they're jumping over it.
So is this bad news for Darren? Is it going to put him out of business?
No, not at all. And probably the key thing is you can't buy recycled content in the country because it's not here. So
tell us a bit about that. Why is that the case?
Well, the main reason is it's been exported to China for so long.
Right.
So to buy recycled plastic today, you can't get it in Australia. So our members are looking for recycled plastic. It's simply shipped offshore, so they can't get it. So that's going to change over the next 5 years. So the signals are there, they want it. And probably just the other comment about the half of waste being packaging. We had a bit of a chat outside. Like, out of total, there's about 67 million tonnes of waste generated annually in Australia. 20% of that is generated at household level, and a quarter of that is recycling. So you're only talking 5% is packaging.
Yeah.
Of that, plastic is it's about 6%. So less than 1% of recycling is plastic. And we've got to fix it, but we've got to bear in mind things like the sustainable guideline at the top there, clean water and sanitation. So circling back to the initial question about ocean plastics, 95% of that, this is data, that's not my data, it's credible data, 95% of ocean plastics come out of Asia and Africa, and it's all because they don't have clean drinking water. So our members have this real dilemma. Do you walk away from plastics that's brought or taken clean drinking water to developing countries, and what do you replace it with? Do you replace it with glass? The same thing will happen, it'll just sink. It's also got a higher life cycle footprint or environmental footprint. So we just got to think through it very carefully. So recycled content's the way to go. Plastic's a great product, but not in the ocean. So we've just got to work with developing nations and make sure there's waste collection infrastructure in those places and recycling locally.
Okay, so the yellow bin is not dead?
Not by a long shot.
Okay.
No.
Perfect.
I've worked in the waste industry when the whole China sword thing happened as well.
Yep.
So I lived and breathed that every day. It was a shock at the time, but there were signals coming for a few years before that.
Right.
So it's just a matter of now. The easiest way to put it is China sword happened on the 1st of January 2018. On that day, packaging didn't change, just our access to infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we can't access infrastructure in China and Asia. We need to build it here.
Yeah.
And we need government support to hypothecate the levy because ratepayers are already paying for it. Levies, every time your red bin goes to the tip, you're paying $140 a tonne in levies. That's meant to come back to recycling. That's not happening at the moment. So if we get that...
So where is that money been going?
It goes to general revenue. About 20% in some states gets hypothecated back to recycling.
Right.
If you equalise the levy across all the states, it's about $1 billion per annum incremental income.
Wow.
So we can do it. So it's
Amazing.
far from dead.
I was also just going to say, ultimately, we almost have to look backwards to move forwards with this one. We went down a path of commingling in our yellow bin a few years ago because it was about trying to reduce the costs to council in terms of handling our waste.
Yeah.
If we took a step back, part of the problem that we face at the moment is the fact that we've got glass in our commingling bins. So it gets into the paper and it gets into the plastic and it causes problems with those materials, and that's what we talk about when we talk about contamination in the yellow bin. If we stepped back and separated those materials out a little more carefully, a lot of those issues probably wouldn't exist, and we would have a much better outcome for the materials that we are actually putting into our yellow bin. So it's almost a case of devolving to evolve.
Right.
One of the challenges we face is it's not necessarily a war on plastic, it's a war on convenience.
Yeah.
We just like things to be simple and easy. It's so much easier to just put it into one yellow bin and then not think about it.
Yeah.
If you've got, like some countries like Japan, they don't have a commingled bin at home. You've got to collect up all your recyclables, take it to a community recycling centre, and there's like 40 or 50 bins, and you have to go and sort out into 50 bins. It's a much less convenient system.
Yeah.
And we are typically lazy and want the easiest system at our door, and it gets taken away from us.
So I remember
That's the challenge.
living in Germany. It was I think it was 16 different ways that you recycle, but ironically you had to put it in the car often and take it somewhere to be recycled. So the carbon footprint of the recycling makes it so great.
Germany, 96% of plastic PET bottles are recovered and reprocessed in Germany.
Yeah.
In Australia, our collection rate is around about 16 to 17%, of which virtually 0% is reprocessed. No, we're a long way away from...
Lots of opportunity.
And the technology's there, the equipment's there, we just don't have the back-end infrastructure because China was so close.
Yep.
And it was easy, convenient, to not have to deal with proper sorting at the back end, just put it in a container, send it to China. And we blame China for all this waste generation. If you look at the world's recycling movements, over 50% of the collected materials around the world was being sent to China. And then we blame China for being the highest waste generator. We're sending it to them. How do we blame them? They're taking our bloody waste.
Yeah.
It's our friggin' fault. It's our stuff.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that we, as waste producers, and if you look at where waste is exported from and imported to, if you look at, Australia is relatively small in terms of the global waste production, but we're up there and we're contributing to the problem, and all of the fact that a lot of the plastics from the ocean is leaking out through Asia, that's because we are exporting it. So that's partly our plastic that is being, leaked out into the ocean because we're sending the problem overseas, and we're limited to how much we can do that now. So I think that we do have an ethical responsibility and a social responsibility to help by setting up our own infrastructure here, but then also working with nations so we have a project with Timor-Leste where we're donating our chemical recycling technology to build a plant over there to help them potentially become one of the first plastic neutral countries in the world. So they, as a small island Pacific nation, do deal with a lot of ocean plastic. So it's not necessarily the plastic that they produce, but they deal with a lot of plastics that wash up there. So the idea being that by putting infrastructure for them to be able to handle plastics there at the source of the problem, that not only helps them recover those ocean plastics and reduce plastic pollution in the area, but also produces a local economy where they can have a saleable product being the oil, to basically become a self-funding project. So I think that as well as dealing with our own recycling here, we also have a responsibility to facilitate those nations that we have drowned in plastic.
Okay.
Mentioned that we are only a small piece in the global puzzle in terms of numbers. Per capita, we are like the second in the world behind America of waste generation per person. So whilst luckily we don't have the population of China, because it's a big problem. So we generate a lot per person. And then we talk about the percentage of plastic. That is by weight. You go down, knock down a skyscraper building, and that's a lot of tonnage of inert concrete. Plastic, when it's measured by weight, doesn't weigh very much. So when I say it's only 6% of our waste, that's the environmental impact. I think we should be measuring our waste by the environmental impact of it. I'd rather see a ton of concrete in the ocean than 100 kilograms of plastic in the ocean.
Yeah. So just a reminder, if you have questions, we'll throw the microphone out in a minute. If you have some questions and you're a little bit shy to ask, you can always jump on the app and type your question out, and I'll attempt to try and get through them. But maybe back to you, Barry. I mean, you know, the issue around building a plastic solution in a circular economy. How is it aspirational to think that we can change consumer behaviour? Is it a regulatory or is it extension and awareness? Or is it infrastructure, or is it all of those things?
There's a couple of key barriers. So when we talk to government, the first thing is availability. We're collecting it here, we're now stockpiling it here, we've got to convert it to a product here so we can buy it back and put it back into bottles. So the first thing is availability. Along with that, we need traceability. It's illegal to label a product 100% recyclable if you don't know where it is or where it's been. At the moment, there's no traceability beyond a container doors. So if there's plastic being exported, there's no audit trail. So we can't buy it back with any confidence that it is actually recycled content.
Is it right that soon that plastic exports or waste exports will be banned?
So coming out of COAG, the Prime Minister made an announcement that the dates still to be confirmed, but the export of the definitions aren't there, but plastics, glass, paper and rubber will cease, but that's for waste. So there's a definition of when is a waste no longer a waste. So if it's washed, pelletised, flaked, can it be exported?
Yep.
If glass is crushed and washed, can it be exported? So when does it cease being a waste and become a commodity? So that we understand that will still be exported. But that's probably about 2 to 3 years away, because to get infrastructure built in Australia, by the time you go through the regulatory processes, permits, DAs, all that, plus actually building it, securing your feedstock, it's about 3 years minimum.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it can happen, but the thing we need as an industry, we need clean material. So it goes back to the original comment. We need clean material that can be food grade so that we don't risk any health and safety. The key thing for our industry for packaging is it actually transports food and provides, I guess, a barrier to stops food waste, but also food safety is key. So we need high quality material, we need it to be traceable.
Yeah. So maybe Darren and Andrea, for you guys, give us a sense, or give the audience a sense of the latest innovation that's happening. Maybe it's in sorting, maybe it's in the processing. Where are we at, and how is Australia placed versus the world in terms of that technology and innovation?
Yeah. The space we're working in, which is the PET and the HTP, that's the process and technology was invented decades ago. It's out there. I just came back from the China Plastic Conference, and there was 180,000 delegates, 3,500 exhibitors, and there was probably about 30 of these buildings side by side, 3 stories high. That is and a big chunk of that was dedicated to recycling plastics. Like, the technology's there. We went to one province when we were looking at buying machinery. It was 30 different manufacturers in one city that manufacture full recycling lines. Like, the technology's there. We can't blame technology. It's there for those particular materials. Some of the 3 to 7s and the mixed is another challenge. And it's there. There's companies. Germany's doing 96% recovery and reprocessing. We can't blame technology for the lack of reprocessing. It comes back to that convenience. It was easy to put on a ship and send it to China. We didn't have to raise the capital. We didn't have to do the sorting. We didn't have to worry about any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so we don't have to invent technology. We just need to take responsibility for our waste and deal with it.
Yeah, and the other types of plastics, so those that aren't the type 1 and type 2, which we know we can easily and economically recycle, and the technology is there. And we do have some great technology on the sorting side. So in terms of so once your recycling bin's collected, it gets sent to a MRF, a material recovery facility. Within that material recovery facility, there's a series of processes that we'll go through to separate out the glass, plastic, paper. Within that plastic stream, there's actually some great technology in terms of optically sorting, so machines that can optically identify different types of plastic, shoot out the PET here, HDPE here, and other types of plastic. So we know that the technology is there, and so we need investment in the sorting first, because that's the first step, and the better that we can sort, and again, source separation, so getting the household and the consumer to do as much of that sorting as possible, so education, community education about that, and providing the community with those different bins, so plastic and glass and paper. So within our primary sorting facility on the New South Wales Central Coast, we have councils which have commingle bins, and we have councils that have paper and separate paper and plastic glass. So when the trucks come in, the trucks with the commingle bins go one way, and the trucks that have the two separated go another. And I tell you, you look at those piles of resources, and there's a stark difference in terms of the amount of contamination, and that impacts the amount that we can recover and the quality of the products once they're recovered. So that is one thing that we can do on a national level, source separation, those two separate bins. And the other is investing in sorting technology so that we can improve the way that we actually sort different types of plastic. And then there's the investing in the technologies which actually reprocess the plastic, so the PET and the HDPE, but then also for all those other types of plastic, which unfortunately, if they are more than likely going to landfill because they were previously shipped overseas, can't do that anymore. So chemical recycling, what we can do is take any type of plastic, pretty much any type of plastic, make it back into oil. So with technology is there, and in terms of how is Australia placed, I mean, so Australia, we are the global leaders in that form of chemical recycling and hydrothermal upgrading. So, but unfortunately, because of partly funding and partly government policy for new technologies and emerging technologies, our first plant is being built overseas in the UK next year. So we have a pilot facility here which has been operating for 10 years, but Australian technology is having to be commercialised overseas ahead of here. So that is another issue in terms of policy which embraces technology, and this harks back to Europe, and they do have policy which embraces technological innovation to fast track it in terms of approval, which we just don't have here. We're not very good at sort of throwing ourselves into new and emerging things, and we don't have policy which basically mandates having recycled content. In Europe, they have policy which basically says that 20% of all road transport fuel has to come from a renewable or sustainable source. And that includes plastic. We just don't have that policy here. So I think we just need to do more in terms of making things written into mandatory policy and embracing new technology.
Okay. So listen, we've got a roving mic. We've got about 20 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is allow sufficient time to throw it to the floor. If anyone's got a question, maybe put your hand up and let's go. Anyone? I know you've got questions because I've seen lots on the app. So if you're too shy, I can ask it. No problem. Okay, so I'll ask the first question to you guys. What is the panel's position on plant-based compostable plastics? Plant-based compostable plastics.
I don't want them anywhere near my factory. Happy for them to go somewhere else. But the challenge is for compostable type materials, you don't want them in a landfill because you need the temperature for the activation to start breaking down. a lot of the composting facilities, they're like, we don't want plastic, and that kind of looks like plastic, so they screen it out. So you got to have the back-end systemic collection for that to be a good idea.
Right, Jayne?
I was just going to say, interestingly, I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of the materials that are being used around here today are produced by a company called Biopack. Biopack produce compostable materials. They are both industrial and home compostable across their range. They have varying different levels of compostability. One of the things that they as a company recognised was that even though they were producing these great compostable materials, they were going straight to landfill because there was very little in the way of composting facilities around the country to actually process them. So they've gone down the next step of the path to create a collection system themselves, and they have gone into partnership with composters to make sure that when you are a client of Biopack, you have somewhere for your compostables to go. So these are the kind of gaps in the marketplace that, small steps are starting to fill them. But if we actually want to move down this path, we have to make sure that that infrastructure is there. By the same contrast, as I was saying earlier, we have an issue with biodegradable and compostable plastics that are mimicking traditional plastics and that are causing problems for recycling streams in areas where we're looking at viable materials like PET. So there's a bit of a hurdle that we're having to get across there, but certainly in terms of moving down that path with things like this sort of environment where we have a closed scenario that we can use compostables, make sure that they all go into the right bin, get them to the right place for processing, compost them, turn them out and put them into agricultural applications and things like that. That's a great win, but we have to make sure that that infrastructure exists.
Got a little bit of audience participation. Hands up, who is actively recycling at home? Hands up, keep your hand up if you're really, really frustrated with the state of recycling at the moment. Yeah, okay, so it's pretty unanimous. Okay, so let's throw it to the floor. Oh, sorry, Barry, while we're doing that,
I was just going to make a comment on the organics, just because when I was in the waste industry, if you live in Adelaide, you've got access to, everyone's got a green bin that they can put food in, nearly the whole population. So there, if you had compostable packaging, it's a great solution. Anywhere else in the country is hit and miss. So it comes back again to infrastructure.
Yep.
Down there, Green Industries SA is very proactive. Jeffries, Peat Soils are very advanced. They've been sort of on the food waste journey for 10, 15 years already.
Yep.
So we can do it again. It's something to aspire to. But at the moment, in most states, it's still too far off.
Okay.
And a lot of councils don't want to take a lot of that material either, so a lot of it's going straight to landfill because it has no other end point.
I think that's where it's all going now, right? At the moment.
Not necessarily. There are, I've been to an industrial composter. I've been to an open composting system. They're working with small groups of people. They're working with companies like Biopack, so they're taking them from particular sources. But as a rule, anything that if you've got a compostable material and it goes into a normal bin, it's going to a landfill.
Yeah, right.
Is the panel aware
Yep,
whether it's
okay.
working? Is it working?
Yep.
Is the panel aware that Utrecht University has basically identified 50 fungi species that eat plastic in the last 2 years? Now, that's not scalable at this stage. It needs work and research, but it's a promising field. And I just want to make one other comment. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't get our bread in plastic, it came in a piece of tissue paper. And we didn't get our milk in plastic either. It came in Tetra Paks, and before that it came in milk bottles. Why can't we go back to some of that? Why do we have to shop when we're shopping in supermarkets? Why can't we get a little bit more innovative and give the little guys in the little shops who'll give you your meat and stuff like this in real packaging that, avoids the plastic?
These are the sorts of things that are happening in the background at the moment. We can't go like that and change systems that have become very embedded in our society. But these are the sorts of things that companies like APCO and the AFGC are working with manufacturers to try and find these new ways of doing things. And you may not be seeing it right now, but give it another 12, 18 months and all of a sudden things are going to start appearing before your eyes that will answer all these questions that you're asking.
Like in Europe, New York, there's, I think it's called Loop. So you can buy your shampoo in New York, empty the bottle, walk down, get it refilled. So Unilever, Procter's, companies like that, they're driving those changes. So it's starting. It'll be an evolution. Our geographic spread's going to make it a little bit more difficult, but those things, they're coming.
Okay.
I saw a Homeware's product that was, they're about to go into crowdfunding. I was thinking about this with Darren earlier, about to go into crowdfunding very shortly, whereby they're producing high quality bottles for homeware products, so bathroom products, cleaning, household products. They also have a refillable sachet scheme. So you get a refillable sachet, it's delivered to your door, you get it with an Australia Post envelope. When it's empty, you send it all back to the manufacturer. They refill the sachet and resend that to you. So the sachet, which is usually the disposable bit in this process, is now reusable. So that's a whole raft of plastic that's just taken out of that cycle as well. Okay. So these are models that are starting to emerge in the background, and they need some funding from people like us who are going, yeah, we love this idea. We've got to get behind this stuff and support it, because it's the only way it's ever going to reach the broader
I spent
audience.
3 years trying to figure out the same answer. Why are we doing what we're doing? And pretty much every conversation I have, it comes back to two things: convenience, economics. Yeah. It's cheaper for companies to buy a brand new bottle out of India than to collect it back up, wash it, check there's no cracks on the lip, face the risk of litigation, all that sort of stuff. It's just easier to deal with it, and it's cheaper.
Yeah, we as consumers don't want to pay that price.
Yeah, you go, and most people, when you're in a supermarket, are buying stuff based on the price. There's a race to the bottom. It's about getting the cheapest product, and recycling, unfortunately, is a hell of a lot more work and effort than just chucking it in a landfill, chucking it in a ship to send it to China, than doing the infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. So it's...
Okay.
But now companies are starting to see the pressure from consumers. The beverage companies are probably a perfect example of that. They're getting slammed through social media, campaigns, Greenpeace, supermarkets, you name it. And as a result of that, people are now starting going, do I need to buy that water bottle, plastic water bottle, or can I just use a reusable? All of a sudden now these beverage companies are seeing the economics of it, going, actually, we need to be a bit more environmentally friendly to maximise our profits. So there's a shifting time right now. It's very interesting.
Okay.
They're going to lose their consumers if they're not careful, and that'll be the end of them.
The economics are interesting. I met a gentleman last year, a Dutchman, who was offering $10 a litre for milk. He could ship it anywhere in the world in 30 days. He could process it on his ship. The supermarkets here are offering the growers about 45 to 50 cents. I think they just raised it 10 cents recently. It is absolute bullshit. The prices they're offering. And if I was any dairy farmer, I'd be looking to send my milk to China, and there'd be no milk on the shelves in Australia because the consumers are used to paying $1 and $2 a litre, and that's just a rubbish price. So the price argument to me doesn't wash. People need to learn to pay a little bit more for quality food and quality packaging. Otherwise, it's going to piss off. It'll go overseas.
Okay. Next question.
I think seasonality is a big issue in that as well. We expect to have everything that we have
all year round.
All year round.
Yeah.
And it's got to come from miles away most of the time in order to do that.
Hi there, I'm a food producer and we're based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We're a vertical farm and right now we're small, but we're looking to replicate and scale, and hopefully we'll have the buying power of Coke, maybe, one day, who knows. But right now we're faced with the pressure that a lot of small growers are faced with, that our consumers really want us to have compostable and biodegradable packaging, and we've experimented with some different products. One, they're more expensive. We find that they've warped with temperature changes going. It's minus 20 quite often in Jackson Hole, and it hasn't worked out. And so I'm listening to you and trying to understand what my clever answer to them is going to be. And is that to say that it's actually, while we're quite small, in our best interest to use plastics that can be recycled, and then as we grow larger, hopefully can be in the push to work towards compostable packaging, but it doesn't really matter if there's not the infrastructure there. So I'm still trying to get that straight, if you could help me.
So you're just trying to find a way for innovators to scale to provide better products at scale for you at a better price.
Yeah, well, I guess I think it's an uncomfortable position for the smaller producer to be in, and how you suggest we navigate that.
I might just answer from the perspective of, I guess, the bigger sort of FMCG companies, or the conversations that we as recycling technology companies are having with the big players. And that is, we have the technology to recycle these different types of plastic, and it's going to come online soon. So things like we're confident that, say, type 1 and type 2 plastic, actually you're better off at the moment. I know consumers don't really want to hear it, but you're better off using PET and HDPE than you are compostable plastic, because a much greater percentage is actually being recycled. We have the infrastructure and the technology to recycle those type 1 and type 2 plastics. And when we bring chemical recycling online at a commercial level, which is only, say, 12, 18 months away, we're going to be able to recycle all those other different types of plastics. So things that aren't getting physically recycled, pretty much everything that's not a type 1 or type 2, so your polypropylenes, your low-density PE, polystyrene, we can do all that with chemical recycling. Plus we know once we recycle a plastic bottle, say 2 or 3 times, the plastic starts to degrade. And that's why, when we're talking about PET, for example, and making new plastic bottles, people want that virgin material because it's got that quality that they're going to be able to manufacture products which consumers want to use. But unfortunately, even though things like compostable and biodegradable sound good, because at this point in time we don't have the infrastructure or the logistics in terms of collection to deal with that, in reality it's not really being recycled. If it goes to landfill, it's probably going to be worse than other types of plastics, because it needs a aerobic condition, so oxygen in which to compost, which landfills there's no air, so it's not going to compost. So to cut a very long story short, you're actually better off using PET and HDPE right here, right now, and in 12 to 18 months, you're probably better off just sticking with plastic, although, having said that, it sounds like compostable plastic is going to probably in the future have the infrastructure to recycle, but right here, right now, maybe not.
What do you think, Darren?
So the conversations we're having with, the big FMCGs are, don't change your packaging. We have the technology, just keep it in place, invest in new technologies like chemical recycling, help us get this to market quickly, and then we can deal with all the current packaging. We can make plastic a circular resource, so don't change your packaging, because once they change, we're talking, hundreds of thousands of units and the cost of changing and retooling all this different packaging equipment. We're saying to them, don't do it, help us bring the solution online quicker, and then we can recycle everything you're already doing. So those are the conversations we're having with the big guys right now.
There's been a lot of studies done into all the different types of packaging materials, and to do a proper study, you got to do what's called a lifecycle analysis, and that's everything from getting the resources out of the ground into producing into the package, the logistics, transport, collection, recovery, and that full life cycle. And PET often comes out the number one material, because it is it's got the mechanical properties you need. It doesn't have the warping and the degradation issues and that sort of stuff. It's watertight, it's transparent. From an engineering, I'm an engineer by background, it's got the most amazing engineering properties out there, and that's why it's been so prolifically successful. Plastic is the most commonly used material by mankind since 1976. And there's a reason for that. It just works from an engineering point of view. The challenge with plastic is the pollution side. If it's recovered and it goes into we're doing the mechanical reprocessing side, it's pretty simple technology. And if you're sourcing your power from renewable sources, we're using treated wastewater in there, your footprint is actually very, very minimal.
So, Darren, that was actually one of the questions that's come from, and we'll have to go to rapid-fire questions.
The best thing to do is look at your waste hierarchy, because at the top of the list is reuse, and then you start to move down through recycling. Composting's always below recycling. So if you've got plastic packaging and it's made from PET, you're sitting higher in the waste hierarchy than you would be if you take a composting option.
So, Darren, Andrea, how much energy does your system use in a short answer?
Our plant, we're looking at about 4 megawatts of power, and we've sourced that from solar.
From solar? So your carbon footprint
zero coal-fired power.
Okay. Andrea?
I'd love to say that we have zero carbon footprint, but what we do have is we recycle the water through the process. So the water that we use to bring the plastic up to those high temperatures and pressures, that gets recycled back through. for every tonne of plastic we put in, we get about 85% oil conversion. The rest, the 15% from the plastics, is gas, which fires the process, which powers the process. So yes, initially we do need energy, but when we look at, for us on the plastic side, the big benefit is basically diverting plastic from landfill and from the ocean. So, and it's transforming plastic into a circular resource that we can use over and over again, because as we say, plastic in itself, if it's used and reused, is not the issue, it's the fact that we throw it away.
Okay, rapid fire question.
Hello. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much. It's very informative, and I'm someone who has been very much against plastic. So I'm a food manufacturer from New Zealand, and right now we're using glass bottles, and we do subscription. So we basically bring our product in glass bottles, and the next week we pick up the glass bottles and refill with the product. But we do have another segment where we are trying to go after retail, and I was trying to figure out how can I use plastic and remain environmentally friendly, and I guess I sort of got my answer. And do you know if there is something like this exists in New Zealand? Because I haven't done my research, obviously. I was very much against plastic.
Probably one thing, New Zealand is a little bit different to Australia. Their recycled content on glass is about double what it is here. And that's the same reason as why China banned recycling coming there. There's so much contaminants in the world's recycling, China banned it. In New Zealand, a lot of the glass is collected separately, it's clean. So they've got double the recycled content than we do here. So it just goes back to how clean it is. The recycling system is, other than that, is very similar. So PET, HDPE in New Zealand is the same. It's got high recycling rates as well.
So I was just going to say, with New Zealand are actually more environmentally progressive than Australia in terms of chemical recycling. So we already have a collaboration in New Zealand to build a CAT-HTR plant with OG Fibre Solutions, who are New Zealand's biggest recycler. So it's more than likely that they will have chemical recycling at a commercial scale before Australia. I just thought I'd mention that.
One key thing to think about, are you buying recycled packaging? Like for us as a reprocessor, we can, for every kilo of stuff we sell, we can put another kilo through. At the end of the day, if we can't take in more than we can get rid of. Otherwise you end up with big stockpiles. So as a brand, the best thing you can do is find packaging that is coming from recycled. It's no good just getting virgin PET and then, the recyclers deal with it, because that's a one-way street. For every... Yeah.
So Darren, how do consumers find out? I mean, how do these guys find out who's selling?
Again, this is one of the problems that we have at the moment, because we don't have a chain of custody around things like recycled content. We don't have the capacity to label our packaging at the moment. APCO is working on this. We have a project at the moment looking at what infrastructure is required to actually generate that recycled label, and you're going to start seeing this sort of stuff appear on your packaging, so that you, as a consumer at the shop front, at the shelf, can decide on a product purchase based on the fact that it's got recycled content
fantastic.
in it.
I think we'll go one more question up the back here.
Thank you. My name is Clifford Moss. I'm the co-founder of a conscious consumption platform called Goodsmiths. So as we're in a war, as you so rightly say, Darren, on convenience, and as we are surrounded by systems which are very difficult to work in some of the capacities that we would prefer to, can you just take yourselves into your consumer minds, not your business people minds, and give us one thing each that every person in here as a consumer can go home and do differently?
Hey, that was my takeaway. So I think thank you for asking. Barry, do you want to start with you?
The simple one for me is source separate at home. Put your plastics into RedCycle, your soft plastics, and just source separate at home, because the cleaner it is when it gets in the truck, the cleaner it is at the facility. That's, to me, the most direct thing you can do and have a definite impact.
As a consumer, use your purchasing as an influencer. Like when you're in the supermarket, don't buy the bagged up kilo of bananas because they're 50 cents cheaper. Because then you start buying that, the supermarkets keep supplying that. Supply and demand. They will only sell what we buy. So buy the stuff that you're happy with the packaging. Simple as that.
I agree with both of those. Source separation. Obviously, putting your purchasing power behind recycled content. And the other thing I would say is where you have an opportunity to do so, lobbying the government to invest in local recycling. So if sharing, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there around recycling. We want consumers to keep putting things in the yellow bins. Don't stop putting things in the yellow bins just because I've told you we can't recycle type 5 polypropylene. Keep doing it, because this time next year we're not going to be in this position. We're going to be in a better position. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep putting it in the yellow bin. Most of it does get recycled, and even more will get recycled this time next year.
Fantastic.
I agree with all that. I agree that we are in a very changing landscape, and a lot of things are going to happen very quickly when they actually start to come to fruition. From my perspective, one of the most important things I think is get organics out of your waste bin, out of your red bin. Recycling and everything aside, the emissions that come out of organics going into landfill are enormous. And if you can get a worm farm or a compost bin or a bokashi bin or whatever it might be that allows you to actually take your organics out of your waste bin, that's a huge step in the right direction. So all the wonderful recycling tips as well, but organics is a big concern.
Yeah, so it sounds as though, just in wrapping up, that there's infrastructure plays at place, there's technology available. A lot of it comes down to consumer choice, and a movement starts with an individual. And I know from our perspective in living in Singapore, Deliveroo, which are many delivery companies, they've just opted out. You actually opt in for plastic knives and forks and stuff for. So look for food delivery companies are actually supplying convenient food, but in sustainable packaging, and I think that's something that you can take as a
Actually, there's a great website here called Trash Your Takeaway, and it allows you to find takeaway places that will let you bring your own containers.
Fantastic. So please give it up for the panel. Fantastic. Beautiful. Okay.